Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very exciting Civilizations in Review. I am quite looking forward to tonight's call for empire that maybe a lot of you already know. We're here with Matteo Piovacari, all the way in Italy, so thank you for staying up so late your time. And our very first Civilizations in Review live streamer, Coretta Lemetra, here to chat about the Phoenician Empire, one that is, I think, relatively well known, and excited to learn even more wonderful details about it. Again, you're seeing us here live on Facebook, but we are also on Spotify for our podcast, our YouTube, our website, and Instagram TV to see all of the same conversation, but in all of those places as we have I think, our 11th Civilization in Review. So thank you again, Matteo, for writing this, for being here, and Coretta for helping me ask these great questions. I'll throw it to you, Coretta, to read the 101 word intro.
Yes, let's do it. I am so excited to hear about the Phoenicians, and it's great to be co-hosting on this lovely Friday. So I'll just jump right in and read the 101 that you wrote, Matteo. The Phoenicians remain renowned today as the greatest mariners of the ancient world, thanks to their high level of skill in shipbuilding and sailing. However, the civilization never became an empire. Rather, the Phoenician civilization organized its thalassocracy. That's a tricky one. We'll have to dig into that one. In independent city-states along the eastern Mediterranean coast, corresponding to the modern territories of southern Syria, Lebanon, and northern Israel. Their enterprising trade and maritime culture began to flourish around 2000 BCE. The Phoenicians likely referred to themselves as Canaanites. The name Phoenicians derives from the ancient Greek word, and you guys listening to this, you're gonna have to go read it on the page because there's no way that I can pronounce it. If anyone who speaks Greek, please let us know how you pronounce this. But the Greek word refers to the purple dye that the Phoenicians were famous for trading.
Okay.
What a great intro. Thank you for getting us all situated here. I have been to Lebanon several times, and every time there are those beautiful wood carvings of their boats that are the Phoenician Empire. Let's just start there, because that's the thing I know the most about them, and we can dive more into all the other great aspects. Tell us more about their shipbuilding and sailing and maritime mariner skills.
Okay. So first and foremost, it's very great to be here tonight with you. Thank to Alfuzai for all this incredible effort that we are doing together to build this hub of knowledge for the MENA region. Actually, the reason why I chose the Phoenicians is because with them I believe to share something, which is this desire of going beyond, always beyond, expanding towards new horizons. And it's basically what the Phoenicians did all across their, I guess, around 2,300 years of life, as this civilization existed as such. So there is, of course, I open my intro with this very very important sentence, because they were like, the main skill was when they were going to the sea. So what happened to the Phoenicians? So the Phoenicians were born by these civilizations that were living in the region, in this coastal region of the Levant, in the late Bronze Age. So we are thinking about 3,000, 4,000 BCE. And they were basically enclosed. So their way to the mainland was enclosed by this, was barred by this mountains range. We think about, for example, the mountains of Lebanon, where I've also been and I had the pleasure to visit, or the Golan East, for example, in between Syria and Israel. So they couldn't go farther there, so they moved to the sea. So they expanded to the sea, and they made of this premise the strength, their flagship that made them famous across all eras. So basically, they invented in all these, let's say, maritime realm, a lot of different techniques of navigation. For example, the Phoenicians were very good at using stars to navigate in the sea. They were among the first to use stars, and especially to study as well the tides as ways of interpreting the sea and finding the routes. Also, they were using natural coastal marks, for example, to move. Or on the other side, they were great shipbuilders, they great inventors, and they innovated in certain aspects as well in this shipbuilding that endured over centuries and arrived towards our contemporary days. So, for example, they were the first using the keel, if I pronounce it correctly. So they basically reinforced the keel of the already existing ships, and they made them more balanced and especially waterproof, extremely waterproof. So their ships were so resistant, so fast, also given their geometry, let's say, their architectural work that was behind them. Also, they invented or used for the first time, probably throwing a rock with a wire, the anchor, which is so fundamental nowadays to navigate. And so from a necessity of simply surviving as a civilization, given their morphology of their land, and the fact that they were also surrounded by these great empires, became really their strength, in a way that they survived for 3,000 years, even more than that, without being strong warriors. And that's, I think, a record in history. They were actually conquered, but they were left with some independence all the way. And I can stop here, otherwise I'm covering.
Ben, I have a question, if you don't mind me jumping in here.
Yes.
I mean, that the amount of influence it sounds like they had through their trading and the inventions is absolutely amazing. I mean, being that constrained and then being able to actually become that successful through trade is wild. That does bring me to the question, though, and you kind of started touching on this. What were their relationships like with their neighbors, and especially, when they were trading? And were there any attempts to start, taking over territory? What was that like?
So, in a word, they were bad relations, but they managed to survive and to cohabit, let's say, because of this gift of being so good at like sailoring and at trading, that the other empires close to them preferred to let them living and use them than conquering and taking over all their cities. So what happened that in many instances, also like the most important cities of the Phoenician civilization were completely destroyed. Like Sidon and Byblos were destroyed by the Egyptian and by the Hittites in around the 13th centuries BCE. Then they were rebuilt, of course. Then the Egyptian and the Hittites empires collapsed at the hands of the sea people that came from like this strange phenomenon that happened in the period of history that is still a bit unknown by the historians. And also here, nobody knows how, is still really discussed how they survived also this arrival of these sea peoples.
Mm-hmm.
So this is very strange. But in this period, after the defeat, they flourished for being another time conquered, let's say, and razed to the ground. Some whole cities were again burned down by the Assyrians before, around the 9th century BCE, and then the Babylonians as well, and finally the Persian. But what happened is that they were so good at managing these trading routes, of expanding their trading, refining goods, that these all the times this empire were arriving on the shores of the Phoenician land, they were just basically putting a bit of their hand of it, but leaving a lot of independence. So a lot of autonomy as well from the governing point of view. For example, one cool thing is that while there were the Assyrians were ruling over Phoenicia, there was like the king of the city-states of the Phoenician city-states were still there, the kings, but they were accompanied, they were basically followed all the time by a Assyrian governor. So there's this dualism as well in governing for some time. The Persians, for example, left them with a lot more of independence. They became actually a province of the Persian Empire. But this is one of the things that made me a lot like smiling while I was reading, because they resisted, they endured, they survived regardless of all the fuss, all the destruction that was going around, all the very also mighty military powers that were all around all the Phoenicians. If you think only about the Greeks as well, they were big rivals with the same Phoenicians.
That's a really wonderful like take of this empire. I literally only knew them as master shipbuilders and navigation sea people, and didn't realize they lasted nearly 3,000 years. I mean, one of the things I do know is that the Carthage Empire was connected to Phoenician. I think it was a city-state, if I'm not mistaken. And if I am, check out our Carthage section on our 101 website too, because it's there. One of my most like fascinating parts of this is the word thalassocracy. A very fancy looking word. It basically just means they rule by the sea, which again, it's very clear given that they're images of a boat carved into some stone from some tablet. They traded all across the Mediterranean. It's a really, really cool word. Check it out. There's probably a version of it for ruling by land, which almost every other empire would be, but the Phoenicians are very unique to be thalassocracy. I don't want to only focus on the water and maritime and shipbuilding, but that is just so quintessential to this empire that it was. Is there any other things you learned or aspects to it, their relationship with their neighbors, or just anything more to share? Because I'm just so fascinated by, 2000 BCE, no technology, and yet the most long-lasting, endeavored, modern influence of all ships today were built because of their technology or creation, really. So just tell me more. I'm so fascinated by it.
Well, regarding this thalassocracy, one interesting aspect of it is that they basically, so a thalassocracy, as we understood, is a confederation, let's say, of maritime city-states, and that was basically it. So we cannot call the Phoenician Empire because they were simply loosely organized. So there were these city-states that were independent, and they were not even friends with each other. So most of the time they were rivals on trade routes. They even had some small size wars among them, but of very low scale. And they couldn't form an unitary regime as well. And regarding this, there is one anecdote that is very interesting, that, for example, when they were collaborating with the Persian in the last centuries of their civilization, around during the Greek-Persian wars, also the Phoenician took part in the expedition of Xerxes against the Peloponnesian cities. And each of the different Phoenician cities sent a fleet, but the fact is that they were not commanded by one whole guide, whole commander, but each fleet had its own commander, its own guidance, let's say. So they never managed to be friends, these cities. But still today we know them as a civilization because they were sharing a lot in the culture, in the type of goods that were refined, all in the religion, of course, and also to some extent, and also to the political form of government that they had.
This is just too fascinating to me that they weren't actually, so we're not calling it an empire, it's a civilization of city-states that didn't necessarily get along with each other, and that over periods of time had different ruling entities. Do you know how we are continuing calling them kind of the Phoenician city-states? How are historians calling them, or who are they calling the Phoenicians over time?
So, speaking about this, like the origin of the word, as I wrote in my introduction, comes from the ancient Greek language. So, I will spare the pronunciation of it, but it basically the Greeks were basically calling the Phoenicians the purple people. So the ancient Greek word means red or purple, so they were the purple people, and they were known as such because of this giant trading of dyed clothing, textiles that became the adornment of royalties across all over Mesopotamia, Europe. So basically, this also manufacturing and processing of these sea snails were characteristics of all these different city-states. As I told before as well, they shared a lot of the culture and the language and the religion. But actually, they were calling themselves in a totally different ways. Like if you had the opportunity to go to a Phoenician and call him like that, it would probably not understand, because they were calling themselves Canaanites, I guess. So the inhabitants of the lands of Canaan, basically, from how it was written in the ancient scriptures. So this bunch of populations of Semitic origins found themselves there at the proper time, and for necessities, as I told before, became really the dominators in the Mediterranean for a while, at least.
I love that their legacy is that they're the purple people who built ships. I mean, it's just, again, that's just a silly sentence, and yet this is so influential to literally anything that's been on any water, like any boat or mega yacht or ship or whatever, all came from this Phoenician Empire or the purple people. It's crazy.
Sorry, if you look at many also paintings, for example, of the Renaissance or like medieval age, a lot of the clothing were still made out of this dye taken out from the sea snails. So certainly the legacy also there endured a lot.
Man, that's so fascinating, especially because purple is the color of royalty. So there's also that, I guess, because of the connections to the Phoenicians, the purple people. I just find that so fascinating. And that is something I didn't realize they were independent city-states that were not Phoenician, and yet we're lumping them together as one collective word for all. This is, wow. I am learning so much, and I thought I knew this empire really well, or this civilization, not an empire. Let's jump into their econ, because we've talked a little bit about their trading, especially the purple aspect of them. But what's more about their trade routes? Obviously via the waterways, obviously with this purple dye, but clearly how they survived so long. So if you have more details on it, I would love to hear them.
So, like the first reason they survived so long as well, and their trading inheritance survived so long, is that they managed to build this network of incredible towns, settlements, and ports all around the Mediterranean and beyond. There are legends that they even circumnavigated the Horn of Africa, but there are no evidence about that. But actually, they got to Britain. Some of the most important cities in Europe that probably most of you also visited, like Marseille, Palermo in Italy, Tripoli in Libya, the same Beirut, of course, in Lebanon. These were all ancient colonies and trading ports of the Phoenician Empire. Even Tunisia, for example, if we want to mention another one. So they managed to really create this strong network. And what they were exporting in these very fast and resilient ships, they were exporting a lot of potteries as well. So the Phoenician civilization, let's say, that stood out also for their craftsmanship, their ability in the manufacturing of goods like potteries, like clay items, like metal, jewels, really also kind of precious metals like gold or ivory that were all imported from the routes towards North Africa. And there are somebody, this is not still, there also about this, there are a lot of discussion in the academic world and among historians, especially after we open our doors to the Far East of the world, that the word Phoenician that invented glass as first. And the glass makers of Sidon were very renowned all across Europe for their ability in manufacturing glass. So these were mainly the goods they were carrying, and most of the economy was based on that. They were also a very, very capable, like they were a very skillful society, because they were also very capable in the agricultural. But of course, their land that was fertile in the region was very, very narrow, so they couldn't do much with that. They could just survive, but all their fortune and their prosperity was based upon this great ability in trading, importing goods, manufacturing them, making clothes, textiles, items, precious items, valuable goods, and exporting them all across the Mediterranean Sea and beyond.
I'm just intrigued by how many different kind of realms of expertise there were in the Phoenician Empire, and trying to imagine, how each of these developed and how the city-states maybe had one expertise in one city-state or in another, or if it was just kind of across all of them. I know that's a lot of information. But on that same topic of things, of the modern influence that the Phoenicians had, I learned from your 101 that they also really influenced the writing system and alphabet that is used by some civilizations. Can you tell us about that one?
Yeah, sure. That actually is another great legacy of the Phoenicians, because basically two of the most spoken languages in the world nowadays came from a mixture of Phoenician and some other language. So both Arab and modern European languages are based upon Phoenician alphabet. Of course, with a lot of modification from there. What happened? We see that the Phoenicians were great mariners and traders, so they couldn't make much use of the very complicated and long to write languages used, alphabets used, for example, by the Egyptians that were using the hieroglyphs, and by the Mesopotamian peoples that were using these kind of cuneiform symbols. They needed a very much more speedy way of communicating, to doing their daily business. They needed to be, we all know how finance works. So they made up this alphabet composed of 22 sounds, and these sounds could be combined to make words. So with these words, they were communicating. And actually, when the Phoenician civilization declined, their neighbors took advantage of their innovations, of course, in the realm of the sea, but also from this side, because the Greeks took the Phoenician alphabet as well. They modified it. They, for example, had turned the sense, like the verse of writing. So the Phoenicians were writing from right to left, and the Greeks changed it. And for example, they added vowels to it. There were even simpler sound and easy to make words with. So from that, of course, then the Latin inherited the Greek alphabet, and they modified it to the Latin alphabet, on which a lot of European languages are based upon. And on the same side, on the other side, on the Middle Eastern part of the world, the same Phoenician alphabet influenced the Aramaic languages, the local Aramaic languages. And from these mixtures, seemed that the Arab, the modern, or like not really contemporary right now, but of some centuries ago, at least, Arab was born.
Wow, we have them to thank for efficient writing, in addition to maritime and all these trade navigational instruments. I mean, that's an incredible list.
They were absolutely great, actually. Yeah, I mean, if we look around in our world nowadays, we cannot avoid thinking how much of the current world was influenced by such even small civilization, but so innovative. At least I like also civilizations that are so much groundbreaking in what they do. And they did what they were specialized of in the best way possible, let's say.
The amount of inventions that are coming from this one not Phoenician empire, yet we call the Phoenicians, is wow. We can go on for so much longer, but we are wrapping up our time here. Everyone, please actually read this article. Matteo has included so many hyperlinks to continue this knowledge, and he himself is such a wealth that you could definitely chat with him. But my goodness, this is so much more than just people who were really good at ships. My goodness, modern alphabets for a good third of all languages spoken today, as well as the color purple, and trading routes and economy, glass. Wow, just simply wow. Read out so much more about the phenomenal empire. Again, this call will be everywhere. Yeah, Matteo, and any final words for us about this Phoenician empire?
I wanted to add one more very important legacy as well.
Please.
Which is actually that we all think that the Greeks were the ones like experimenting, Republicans' form of governing as first. But actually, like, the reality is that already the Phoenician had done so quite well as well. For the same Carthage that you mentioned before, that was actually a Phoenician colony, had actually a republic with this central figure that was called Suffet, a kind of judge translated, but it was more like you can think of as a prime minister, and a senate. And also already Tyre as well had experienced this kind of form of government that had been praised by as well Aristotle, for example, himself in person, the father of democracy, let's say, praising the Phoenicians for especially the experimentation in Carthage as really also let's say precursors, I can say that, of the Greek polis at the end.
Cool. So also democracy and modern government. Thank you. I am immensely blown away. We have the Carthage as its own civilization on Alfuzaic's page, so you can read even more, as they are two different, I guess, city-states here. My goodness, what a wealth of knowledge you are, Matteo. This article is, and basically all modern things you like, we can trace back to the Phoenicians. So win-win-win all around. Thank you all so much for tuning in today to this beyond informative and innovation-heavy Civilizations in Review. Again, you can see this on our Instagram, our Facebook, our website, our Spotify, and our YouTube, as well as read it on our main website, which is alfuzaic.net. That's ALFUSAIC.net. Thank you all so much. Have a good evening.
Thank you, guys.